All right, good evening. Are we on? We're live. Okay, good evening. Light class turnout. Hopefully people will watch the video later. If it continues to go this way, we'll try and improve our videos. Because we won't have that set up for a class. But all right, tonight we're going to be looking at 2 Kings chapters 18 through 25, and then Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. We're actually going to stop after we get into Josiah and go to all three of those minor prophets, because that's where they fit. It's right at the beginning of Josiah. Okay, just for a little background, remember that 1st and 2nd Kings probably put together by Jeremiah, and it was written to those who had already gone into exile, so sometime before 586. Time period, David's death, the beginning of that's 1st Kings. 2nd Kings covers the rest of it. But it really is trying to give them an idea of the historical development of the kingdom of God under the Davidic covenant, and the welfare of the kingdom depends on the covenant faithfulness of the king and the people. And we've been seeing that. As a king was a good king, the nation would follow. If it was a bad king, he'd lead them into sin. What we're going to find out now when we get to Josiah is even under a good king, there is a revival while he's there. When he dies, it goes right back to where it was. So, having a good kingdom. So that's the basic outline. We are now to point 3, the kingdom of Judah, Hezekiah, to its fall. Okay, from last time, just to catch you up kind of where we're at, we talked about Ahaz. He's the king before Hezekiah. And he was evil, like the kings of Israel, a lot of influence, and he lost territory on all sides. Edom attacked, the Philistines attacked, and it shrunk the area of Judah. Judah had expanded into the Shephelah and into the plains and down. It was controlling the southern routes, but evil kings, it starts shrinking. So Edom is attacked, it's taken over the southern routes, it's attacked the forts in the southern Negev, Philistines attacked, and Hezekiah had also attacked Judah as well. Assyria gets involved, and let's go back one. Assyria got involved, and Ahaz had paid a tribute to Assyria to attack Israel in Damascus, Syria, in order to get them from attacking him. And they did come down. And when they did come down, Hoshea was the king at that point in Israel. He had been under Assyrian domination. He rebelled, hoping that the Pharaoh of Egypt could make an alliance against the power of Assyria. He was also evil. He rebelled, and so Ahaz did not need to pay Assyrians to come down. They were going to come down anyways because they were going to attack Israel and regain, and they were eventually going to attack Egypt, which they do. But Assyria does come down, and they wipe out. They already had taken Levant. They had taken the northern area. Now they take Samaria and what was left of Israel. All these people are deported. Sargon also came down. He cleaned out the coastal areas and captured all these areas. Went down to Egypt. They captured that. We'll talk about that a little later. And so Judah was left as a very small area under Ahaz, and then Assyria is going to attack Judah as well. And that's where we're going to pick it up. Hezekiah becomes, well, back a little bit to Assyria itself. This is the Assyria at its peak, the widest that it had gotten. So it was a huge empire. They had become, remember, under Jonah. Jonah had gone to Nineveh, which is, I just saw it here. Nineveh. He had gone to Nineveh, warned them, and they repented, and God didn't destroy them. Now it's nearly 100 years later. By the time we get to Nahum, it is more than 100 years later, and they have gone back to their old ways. But this is the peak of it. As they became stronger and stronger under Sennacherib, Evil-Merodach, and then finally under Ashurbanipal, they started boasting that the sun, the sun never, sort of like England, the sun never sets, but theirs was the sun rises and sets, and it's never off the Assyrian, because it's like we have nobody left to conquer. well, there was lots left to conquer, but you can see not much down the Arabian Desert. But there was a lot of stuff they could conquer going this direction, or into Turkey, but it was a huge empire, massive empire. When they deported the Israelites, they mostly settled them up in this area. Remember, then they moved people from these areas down into Israel. They actually had to have a Israeli priest, probably one of those that was following the ways of Jeroboam, come down and teach them something about the God of the land. That's how they viewed it. And so they had a mixture of religions in the north, trying to worship the God of Israel because they thought that would keep the lions from killing them, but also worship all their pagan deities. So Samaria was a mess. And that continued on to the time of Jesus. That's one of the reasons they hated the Samaritans. They were a mixture of Jews and Gentiles, and it was this syncretic religion that they were following. Okay? So this is what we're dealing with when we get to Hezekiah. So all this area is conquered by Assyria except for this little area of Judah. That's independent still. Now, we're going to find that the last several kings pay Assyria a tribute, but they were still independent. All right? That's what we're picking up with Hezekiah. So Hezekiah, there seems to be a co-reigning that while Ahaz is king, Hezekiah does come on, because there's some funny things about when it's marking in the the 4th year and the 6th year of Hezekiah, and Sennacherib coming down. But you add that up, there has to be a co-reigning with Ahaz. Well, his mother Abijah, daughter of Zechariah, he was good like King David. He trusted the Lord, and the text actually says there's none were like him beforehand or after in his trust of God.
He removed the high places. He's the only one who did it.
Josiah does too, but he's after.
Oh, okay.
All right, it says, verse 5, he trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that after him there was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor those who were before him. For he clung to the Lord, he did not depart from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord commanded Moses, and the Lord was with him wherever he went, he prospered. Then he rebelled against the king of Assyria, did not serve him. He defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory from the watchtower of the fortified city. So he actually starts bringing about an expansion of the kingdom. Apparently this is even while Ahaz is still there. He's co-regent, so he's leading the armies. Because then it comes back in the 7th year of Hoshea. Assyria comes down and lays siege to Samaria. In the 6th year of Hezekiah, there it's captured, and then it goes on. And then it says the 14th year, but that seems to be the 14th year from when he actually is the sole king. Because we know certain dates. Some of it gets a little confusing, and I'd have to do a lot more study trying to figure out how all these dates are arranged. Shalmaneser defeats, supports Israel, 722. Shalmaneser, not Israel. And then Sennacherib after, so there's some period of time between Shalmaneser taking and carting off Israel, because he's expanding the kingdom in other areas, the Syrian kingdom. 701, we know Sennacherib invades Judah. So he comes down, and remember, Hezekiah had already taken some of the coastal plain. Well, Sennacherib comes down, he again takes up the coastal plain. He had defeated Pharaoh up here in the plain of Alteka. Came down and he's laying siege to all the major cities, to Lachish, Libnah, Adullam, and eventually he's going to end up at Jerusalem. So it's a campaign. It takes time. He has to lay siege to each of these cities. In fact, there's a very good relief that is in the Israel Museum, copy of what was in in Assyria of them capturing Lachish, the battle and everything else in it. Interesting thing to look at. This is little thing there is taken from that, the bowmen and the capture and all the rest. But they had to lay siege to each of these fortified cities, so it's taking them a while to do this. Hezekiah sent 300 talents of silver, 30 talents of gold, while he was laying siege to Lachish, and he'd gone up and was now at Libnah, and it seemed to have settled it for a little while, but almost immediately or at some point he ends up sending back down his emissary, his envoy. He goes to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is a walled city, so he's outside the wall, and he calls for them, and he starts basically telling them, you need to surrender. If you do, and you have men who will ride horses, you can be part of our Syrian empire, but you need to surrender. If you don't, it's going to be bad for you. And don't think that Hezekiah, talking about how the Lord can protect you, is going to work. And he starts listing out all the countries they have conquered, and their gods did not help them. Because that's the pagan mindset. Which god is stronger, and their gods are regional. So he disparages the Lord, and Hezekiah humbles himself, and then Isaiah comes and encourages him. And that humility is a big issue, right? If we're humble before the Lord, we'll see him at work. And we're proud. He resists the proud, disgraces the humble. Sennacherib then defies God, again listing out all the gods of the nations he's conquered, and your God can't do anything either. This is what we're going to do to you. You need to surrender to us. Well, this is what Hezekiah brings before the Lord, is his prayer in chapter 19, 14 through 19, is just laying all this out. And laying out that God, you are the God who, between the cherubim, you're the God who created everything. And just lays it out as, I am going to trust you. Pleading for God to protect them and take away this danger. Ending with, and now, O Lord our God, I pray, deliver us from this hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou alone art God. So his prayer is centered on God, God's glory. And that's where prayer should be centered. And I demonstrate something about the man. Well, God's answer comes through the prophet Isaiah. And basically it kind of comes down to this, you can summarize it. God has used Assyria to accomplish his own will. Because he said in advance, his prophets, this is what's going to happen. Assyria is the nation used to carry that out, to bring punishment upon the nations that have been defiant. But because they were arrogant and made all these boastful claims, then he just made it, I'll put a hook in his nose. I'll put a bridle in his mouth, and I'm going to pull him back. And he is not even going to shoot an arrow at the city. So they're not going to attack. That's what Isaiah tells them. And then the question is, well, what would be the sign that this is going to happen? And so, what would you like it to be? So Hezekiah thinks about it. It's easy for the shadow to progress in a normal fashion. So how about if the shadow goes backwards for 10 steps? And that's what God has happen. It's not only thing. I have no idea how God did that, but he is God. That's why it's a miracle. Don't know. But the shadow returned 10 steps. So he was assured this is not going to happen. And if you remember reading through the story, the angel of the Lord comes, and in one night he destroys 185,000 Assyrians. And then there is a call from Nineveh that Sennacherib had to go back. And so he goes back, and he eventually he's assassinated about 681 BC. So he never even shot an arrow at Jerusalem. Did exactly what he said. Now the interesting thing about it, they lost 185,000 in their army. And so they weren't there anymore, but they continued to expand their kingdom in other places. That tells you kind of how powerful. You lose 185,000 and you're still a powerful nation. So that's Hezekiah. Hezekiah then, apparently about the same time that they're being threatened with a siege, Hezekiah gets sick. He has some sort of boil, and it said it's a mortal illness. And he's told he's going to die. It says he grieves, he turned his face to the wall, and he prays. So some of that says he's depressed, he doesn't want to die. And because he was so humble, the Lord grants him 15 more years of life. Unfortunately, during that period of time, that's also when Manasseh is born, which is not good. Babylonian diplomats come, and at that point, Babylon is not a power. They're also subjected to Assyrian rule. And these officials come, they heard Hezekiah was sick, they bring gifts and letters, and I guess Hezekiah had to be feeling better because he said he showed him everything in his kingdom, all his treasures, everything else. When Isaiah hears about this, he told him that in the future, Babylon was going to come and cart off the royal family and destroy Jerusalem. Hezekiah figured, well, it won't be so while I'm alive. That's what was promised, so he went on and enjoyed the rest of his life. But that was the prophecy. Babylon would do this. Okay? And then Hezekiah, his report is dying. Chronicles gives a lot more information on this. And when we do Chronicles, I'll pull up some more things about what he did. One is he builds this water tunnel. It's quite a feat of engineering. And when we do Chronicles, I'll try and point some of that out because it spends quite a bit of time on Hezekiah. He strengthens the wall. He anticipates what's going to happen. And this water tunnel basically is taking the water that would have been flowing outside the gate, and which case that the invading army could use, and diverts it to go back within the gate so that the water is not available to the attacking army. If you're going to be laid siege, don't help them out by letting them have water. So it's reserved just for Jerusalem. Fascinating thing, you can take a tour of it and hike through it. And when you think of how they did this, it's an incredible feat of engineering. Absolutely incredible. So we'll talk about that more. Well, Manasseh comes after Hezekiah. There is a period of him co-reigning with Hezekiah. Probably began when Hezekiah was sick. But he is evil. In fact, he is definitely the worst of the Judean kings. It describes him in detail. He is evil like the nations dispossessed by Israel. He restores the high places. Hezekiah had gotten rid of them. He establishes or reestablishes Baal worship, or Baal worship, Asherah worship. Altars are made to the host of heaven, so you have Zoroastrianism that's come in. There's things that are made to the sun gods. He put some of these actually in the courts of the temple. He had his sons pass through the fire, which is Molech worship. He practiced and allowed witchcraft, divination. He actually had an Asherah carved and was placed in the temple. He seduced the nation to evil. He is the worst of the Judean kings. I don't think there's any question about that. And those he's rebuked by the prophets, and they predict that it's going to be destroyed. Now, Isaiah already had said this. Now it's going to be other prophets saying the same thing. It's going to be destroyed. In fact, the King James has it as a man wipeth a dish. Which actually is not, it just is as a dish is wiped. So
I know for that part.
I use that on Mother's Day. It's okay for the husband to do the dishes. As a man wipeth a dish. You know what the ladies come back with that is? Not very clean.
Again.
I don't know, I think I do dishes pretty well. But that's how it's going to be wiped away. As the text continues on, it says not only was he guilty of all this idolatry, he was also guilty of shedding innocent blood, filling up Jerusalem. He is an evil king. Chronicles tells us there actually was repentance on his part toward the end of his life, and so that this did not come during his life, it would be delayed. But he is the worst of the worst. After him, his son Ammon becomes king. He's only king for 2 years. He is evil like Manasseh, and they only tolerated 2 years, and he's assassinated. That brings up Nahum. Okay, so flip a little farther over into your notes, we'll go Nahum. Because at this point, it's during this period, end of Manasseh, time of Ammon, that Nahum is a prophet, but he also is a prophet to Assyria. It's a Judean perspective. He gives comfort to Judah from what he's going to say, but the prophecy really is against Assyria. Now remember, Jonah was repent, or actually, that was supposed to be the message. His was that God's going to destroy them, but they repented. You're now a little over 100 years later, and the message is going to be, there is no hope. It's about 654, 639 BC, somewhere in that period of time. And this is being told to them, and at this point, Assyria is at the peak of its power. It is strong. This would be during the period of time of evil Merodach. It is a huge empire. It's at its peak, and yet now you have a Judean prophet saying, you're going to be absolutely destroyed. So there's the context. So that's the theme. Nineveh must be destroyed. Quick outline. Chapter 1 is decreed. Chapter 2 is described. And chapter 3 deserved and tells you why. Some key verses. Let me jump over to my Nahum notes. One 7, the Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in him. But with an overflowing flood, he will make a complete end of its sight. He will pursue his enemies into darkness. That's the Lord's character, and it includes how he will treat Gentile nations. 3:5, he says, behold, I am against you, referring to Nineveh. Declares the Lord of hosts, I will lift up your skirts over your face, and show that to the nations your nakedness, the kingdoms your disgrace. I will throw filth on you and make you vile, set you up as spectacle. It will come about that all who see you will shrink from you and say, Nineveh is devastated. Who will grieve for her? Where will I seek comforters for you? So, it's the Oracle of Nineveh, the vision of Nahum. There are some questions that start coming up pretty quickly, like where is Elka? That's an interesting question. I did a research paper on that in seminary. Several different claims of it, but since it's written from a Jewish perspective, it may be a place in between Jerusalem and Gaza called Beer el-Kos, which could be from this El-Kosh. Another place that's often used is Capernaum, which means city of Nahum. But it may be late that it got that title. There are several different things for that. But where he's from, he's very direct about Nineveh. They've returned to their own old ways. Well, it begins that God's power is seen in his judgment. He's going to take vengeance on his adversaries. Verse 2, he reserves his wrath for his enemies. Verse 3, the Lord is slow to anger and great in power. We see that in several other passages. 1 Peter 3:10, or 10 tells us that he's patient. 3:17 tells us, or in 2 Peter 3:17 says the same thing. He's patient, and he is, but he's not going to leave the guilty unpunished. And then he lists out several things. The God controls the whirlwind, the storm, clouds, famine, drought, sea, wind, earthquakes. So declaring, I'm not like the gods that you were talking about. I control what your gods can't. Your gods are gods of war. I control the elements. His wrath is against all who are evil, verse 6. And verse 7, his protection is for those who take refuge in him. It seems like there is you have a first generation repents, they come to know the Lord. The second generation, as tradition, they kind of hang on to it, but they're not as enthusiastic. The third generation starts departing. So that would fit even from our, over the course of 100 years, Nineveh repented, became complacent, and then back to their old ways. Verse 8, with an overflowing flood, he'll make a complete end of the site, and when we get to the destruction of Nineveh, it actually is with a flood that destroys part of the city so that Babylon can enter and conquer Nineveh. Let's see. Whatever you devise against the Lord, he will make a complete end of it. Distress will not rise up twice. That's a promise that Assyria may be at the peak of its power, but still, it's not going to come against Jerusalem ever again. Tangled thorns, and like those are drunk in their drink. There's confusion. That's what that's speaking of, because drunks are confused, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. A tangle of thorns is confusing. That's what that's talking about. From you, one has gone forth who plotted evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor. That may be Sennacherib. There is indication, like Isaiah 10:7, of his speaking against Israel. So it may be something historical. Though they are are at full strength, and likewise many, even so will be cut off and pass away. So just because a nation's strong doesn't mean it stays that way. And that's seen throughout history. Very strong nations that seem inconquerable can very quickly decline. It's a warning to the United States as well. It may be the peak of power right now, but it doesn't mean it's lasting. And it can decline extremely fast. History's shown that over and over and over again. Even our own lifetime. I think we were all kind of surprised how quickly the Soviet Union declined.
Yeah.
It was rapid. So it can happen to any nation. These things are in God's hands. Into verse 12, though I have afflicted you, I'll afflict you no longer, speaking about Jerusalem. So now I will break his yoke bar from upon you, I'll tear off your shackles. The Lord has issued a command concerning you, your name will no longer be perpetuated. I'll cut off idol and image from the house of your gods, I prepare your grave. So one is about Jerusalem, and Jerusalem had been under the oppression of Assyria for a long time. Azariah paid tribute, Hezekiah paid tribute, Manasseh was captured by Esarhaddon. He paid tribute. It says he's going to break them in verse 14. I'll cut off your idols, your gods. It's a battle of the gods. And judgments against them, they will have no descendants, their gods are destroyed, and their king will be killed. So with that, Judah can celebrate its feasts again. There at the end of middle of verse 15, pay their vows. Their enemy is going to be destroyed. So there's going to be deliverance for Judah. Second is destruction of Nineveh is described. And verse 1 and 2 basically is a call to Nineveh, prepare to defend yourself. And then the destruction, starting in verse 3. The shields of his mighty men are colored red. Their warriors are dressed in scarlet. Their tendency, they would often cover their shields with red hides. That would make them, if you have wood and they shoot flaming arrows, you can burn them up. The hides would tend to distinguish them. Red would be good. The same reason the British used to paint the decks red in their wooden warships. Doesn't show the blood is bad. It's actually why they did do it. So they're red shields and stuff. And then having the shield, you look taller, you look more massive. So part of it, but it's not going to help. Their chariots flashing steel. Remember the movie Ben-Hur? And the guy had the chariot with the spike sticking out? Well, that's what it's talking about. Spike sticking out. Yeah, this flashing steel for as they're running through. you know, you get near the chariot and the chariot will hobble your horse or take you down. Dangerous stuff.
That part is true.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about chariot racing, didn't heard that they did that, but chariots with that, I guess they exist apparently. It's going to be hurried in the city as people are racing back and forth, trying to be prepared for it. He remembers his nobles, they stumble their march, they hurry the wall, and the mantlet is set up. A mantlet is a box or something where your warriors can be inside, and as it moves forward, they're protected until they can get to the wall and go out. It was common in the ancient world to construct something like this. Romans got really good at it, so that you could end up basically like a moving tower, and it's pushed from behind, and as you're pushing it, you can't get the guys in between, and then they're higher than you, and then they're shooting down on you, and then it becomes a way for people to enter in and get over a wall. So that's the mantlet. That's what that's talking about. A device to scale the wall. Then verse 6, the gates of the rivers are open, the palace is dissolved. And what they did is they got the dams and broke, the hydrus overflowed and washed away a big hunk of the wall and allowed them to come in. So here it's predicted beforehand. It's fixed, she is stripped, she's carried away. This is the decree of God. The handmaids are mourning like the sound of doves beating on their breasts. These would be the women in the temple, because the gods are gone. They're moaning the fate of their goddess. Nineveh would be like a pool of water throughout her days. Now they're fleeing, stop, stop, no one can turn back. The inhabitants of the city flee. And remember, we described Nineveh in Jonah. It was a huge city. Even the major part of it was still large and was very strong. Plunder the silver, plunder the gold, no limit for the treasure, wealth from every kind of desirable object, empty, desolate, waste. Hearts are melting, knees are knocking, anguish in the whole body, all their faces grown pale. Where is the den of the lions, the feeding place of the young lions? Where is the lion, the lioness, the lion's cub? Proud, nothing disturbed them. It's a rhetorical question here. It references the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, which had been likened to a lion in its lair, and it would lash out and grab whatever prey it wanted and consume it. So where is it now? It's destroyed. Going to burn it up in smoke. No longer their voice of the messengers being heard into verse 13. They can make no edicts because they have no power left to carry them out. So Nineveh's reason, series of woes. Charges against Nineveh here. It says, woe to the bloody city. We described some of the Assyrian practices beforehand. Like when they conquered Thebes, they smashed the babies, cut up the women, impale. Very cruel. So it's a bloody city. So woe to it, complete full of lies and pillage. They can sometimes win by bluffing their way. You know, a lot easier to make threats and have them yield than have to actually take your army down. Noise of the rattling of the wheel, galloping horses, mounting chariots, horsemen charging. This is the result of the battle. So the first charge really is they're being bloody and liars, employed in falsehood. Result of the battle, they were destroyed, massive corpses, stumbling over the dead. Verse 4, the harlotries of the harlot, that's referring to their spiritual harlotry. Although the other probably was there too, but this is more of their idols and all that was there. The consequence of it, they were going to be overthrown and devastated and defiled. So Nineveh is devastated, verse 7, who will grieve, who will seek. Verse 8 is a comparison to Nahum. Nahum is Thebes. It had been conquered by Assyria sometime before. Thebes is about 400 miles south of Cairo. It was surrounded by the Nile and was considered inconquerable. It was a very strong city. 27 square miles is the size of the ruins. It was renowned. It had 100 gates and a temple that was 330 feet by 170 feet, supported by columns 12 feet in diameter and 60 feet high. That's big. Those are big columns. The height of the church, you got that back door there, is not even, it's about 50 feet.
Yeah.
It's huge. 60 feet, 12 feet in diameter. Had columns like that. It had 141 smaller columns that were 43 feet high and 9 feet in diameter. And it fell to Ashurbanipal in 663 BC. So that's the question there. Your ramparts, the sea, you're well protected, and they conquered it. Sorry. So that's the question, Nineveh. You think you're better than they are? You're not. And then it describes what they did when they conquered Thebes. Which went to captivity. Small children were dashed to pieces at the head of every street, cast lots for the honorable men, that's slavery. Great men bound with fetters. You too will become drunk, you will be hidden. You too will search for rest from the enemy. After Nineveh was destroyed, it was destroyed in 612 BC. The ruins were not found until, can you guess?
1920.
1842.
1840.
It was finally, the ruins were discovered in 1842.
Wow.
Destroyed in 612.
Easy.
So it was complete. It was pretty well destroyed.
Wow.
So your destruction is inevitable. Your strongholds are weak. All your fortifications are fig trees with ripe fruit. When shaken, they'll fall into the eater's mouth. You have they're not going to do you any good. You're no better than a fig tree. Your people, your women in your midst, the gates of your land are open wide to your enemies. Fire consumes your gate bars. Draw for yourself water for the seeds. Strengthen your fortifications. Go in the clay, tread the mortar, take hold of the brick. There fire consumes you. The sword will cut you down, consume you as the locust does. So multiply yourself like the creeping locust. Multiply yourself like a swarming locust. It's not going to do any good. The enemy consumed all their agriculture around as well. And their leaders were weak as well. You've increased your traders more than stars of heavens. The creeping locust strips and flies away. Guards were like swarming locusts. These are the armies that are just surrounding them and take them off. And they end up fleeing in terror. Verse 19, there's no relief for your breakdown. Your wound is incurable. All who hear about you will clap their hands over you, for on whom has not your evil passed continually. So, and I did not use the PowerPoint at all here, but we'll call it about destruction. Deserved. That's Nahum. So you go, and the strongest point about Nahum is the fact this is said while it's at its peak of power.
That they drifted over the 100 years. They had drifted.
They drifted away, and so absolutely destroyed. And that's the strength of prophecy. These are things that are said when. How could that be? That seems impossible. And yet here it is. Here's the prophecy, and it's carried out because we're looking back on it, completely carried out. So that's Nahum. So he is prophesying at the peak of Assyrian power, which we've already seen the map, how big it was, what it was doing. Judah's a small little enclave of independence. Hezekiah has been king. Now he's followed by Manasseh, who's a very evil king. And what Hezekiah had been to expand has contracted again under Manasseh, and then under Ammon. And now Josiah is born, and he becomes king. He's youngly becomes king. He's only 8 years old. Very young, and apparently he has some very good counselor. His mother must have been a godly woman, Jedediah, daughter of Adiah of Bozkath. He did good. He did right in the sight of the Lord, walking the ways of David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. In fact, it's a very strong statement of what he says. Josiah. verse 2. He did right in the sight of the Lord. He walked in all the ways of his father David, nor did he turn aside to the right or to the left. Later on, we'll see all the stuff that he does. And see, there really was nobody like him either. Now, he's young, so he's not really exerting a lot of power until he starts getting a little older. It says, now, in the 18th year of Josiah, so now he's 26, and that'd be about 622 or so, is he makes plans. He wants to start cleaning up the temple and rebuilding it. Things get worn down as years go by, and he wants to refurbish the temple. In the process of that, they find the law of God. During the reigns of Manasseh and Ammon, that's a total of 54 years, they lost the law of God. The temple is filled with all these other deities, pagan deities and stuff. They lost the law of God. When they find it and they read it, that's going to lead to a revival. Now at this point, I got to jump to Zephaniah and Habakkuk, because they are prophesying just prior to the finding of the law and the revivals which we'll get to take place. Because they're describing Judah as also the same way. Incurable. It's bad, and they start describing what's there. We find under Josiah that he's going to get rid of a lot of the stuff that they were prophesied against, but also the prophecy is still going to come. So it's just a little reprieve while Josiah is king. And it's a short one because it's only really about 18 years from when there's revival and doing right until it all goes bad again. Okay? So let's look at Zephaniah. Do Habakkuk. I'll put that one in there first.
Habakkuk first?
Yeah, probably should do. Yeah. They're prophesying about the same time, and so they're within a few years of each other. So, since I have this on PowerPoint, it's Habakkuk first. Let's do Habakkuk first, and we'll do Zephaniah. Kind of hard to tell who preceded who. All right, Habakkuk. His name means one who embraces. He carries the title of a prophet, and then chapter 3, it appears he's a musician. It's noted as musical, it's poetical, so he may have been a priest who was involved with that. The setting here, Judah is still very sinful. That's why I said it's prior to these reformations that come under Josiah. And the message is the judgment is going to come from the Chaldeans. So by this time, though Chaldea is not a world power yet, it is rising in power. They conquer. They don't conquer Nineveh until 612, but there already is under Nabopolassar is starting to gain independence and rising as a power, and they're known. Their character's already known. That's why Habakkuk can speak of it. But again, Assyria is the big gorilla. So what is said here is surprising and scary because the Chaldeans really don't have any better character than the Assyrians did. They're a ruthless people. Okay? Date 635 to 605, somewhere in that period. Babylon rising in power before Josiah's revival. Theme, having faith despite the difficulties, and that's Habakkuk. Despite what you just said, I will trust God. Despite what I know is going to happen, I'm going to trust God. The same way we do, because prophecies tell us what's going to happen in the end times. Here's where, well, every day we're closer. So can we have faith in the midst of difficult circumstances? The answer is yes, because that's the character of God. Okay, so he begins with his complaint. There's a short outline. Let's get to the first problem is his complaint. It would appear that the early reign of Josiah is marked by the same sort of violence and injustice that had marked Ammon's reign. And that would it would make sense. It would continue until there's some kind of reform. And he's a young man. He doesn't really control things. It's going to take a while to do that. The reign of Jehoiakim was also marked by violence and injustice. The prophet here is not complaining from a personal standpoint nearly as much as a national standpoint. He's longing for God to intervene because he's calling out in verse 2. There's violence and there's no one to save. There's strife, there's contention. The law is ignored, justice is not upheld. These are his complaints, and he's not questioning God as in a challenge, but he is asking God questions. How long is this going to continue? He wants godliness to come in. And so Habakkuk really doesn't understand why God has not intervened already. The law is ignored. Is verse 3, literally, the law is chilled from becoming cold. It's not paid attention to. Judges don't pay attention to it. They're doing whatever they want. Sort of like a lot of our court judges. They don't pay attention to the law. They just make up whatever they want at the moment and think everybody has to obey them. So that's an oligarchy. And the problem is that people do, and so it becomes settled that that's what we'll do, even though it's not legal. It's contrary to what the law actually says. God's reply, starting in verse 5, is that, well, look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I'm doing something in your days. You would not believe it if you were told. I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans, fierce, impetuous people, march through the earth to seize dwelling places that are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, keener than wolves in the evening. In other words, they're swift and they have lots of stamina. They come galloping from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping, so it's very quick that they're coming in. They're a horde. There's a lot of them, collected like captives, and they collect captives like sand. They mock at kings. Rulers are laughing matter at them. They laugh at fortresses. They're a strong people. So I'm telling you something. You're not going to believe this. I'm going to use them, and I'm going to bring up what you're talking about. You want justice? I'm going to bring it in. I'm going to wipe out those who brought all the injustice. So that's his complaint, and that was God's reply. Second problem is now he's confused. Quite perplexed in this, because as he's thinking about this, it kind of comes down to this. We deserve to be punished. He understands that. He's actually calling for that kind of justice. But as he's going through and describing these Chaldeans, how can you take a people worse than us to punish us? You're going to use a people worse than we are, and you're going to use them. And so again, it's not so much challenging, he's trying to understand what is going on here. The Chaldeans, they bring all, verse 15, bring all of them up with a hook, drag them away with their net, gather them together in their fishing nets. They harvest people who end up becoming, they're either going to kill them or they become slaves. They're ruthless people. Chapter 2, verse 1, I will stand on my guard post and station myself my rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me, how I may reply when I'm reproved. He expects to be corrected on this, but he says, how can you use them? Okay? I don't know, you can pick many nations in the world. How would you, if that was going to, God's going to use them to punish us as the United States? You get the idea? Well, what's the most disgusting debauched nation you can think of?
United States?
No, it's not the United States. We're not nearly as debauched as a lot of the nations in Europe when it comes to morality and justice and all the rest. It's, there's a lot of places you do not want to be. You want to take any of the continent? You want to be under the Chinese? No, that's pretty bad. How about any of the Islamic republics? No. Yeah, you just go around the world. But what if God used one of those nations that don't even look like they can be a power, and yet says, and they're going to wipe you out?
Maybe.
I'm going to use them. What? It's going to use Venezuela. Okay? It doesn't seem possible. And yet that's what he's doing. But he said, I'm going to just watch. And really what any good student of the Bible should do is learn. We watch for what God's going to do. We're going to see what he's going to answer. Well, the Lord replies, verse 2, chapter 2, verse 2. Record the vision, inscribe it on tablets, that the one who reveals it may run. The vision is yet for the appointed time. It hastens toward the goal. It will not fail, though it tarries. Wait for it. It will certainly come. It will not delay. So God wants all this written down, and I'm going to carry out the plan. It's a sure thing. No doubt about it. You need to wait for this sure thing to come about. Verse 4, behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by faith. That phrase there is quoted in Romans 1:17, Galatians 3:11, and Hebrews 10:38. The act of faith results in the life of faith. Not one time, but it's a continued faith. And that's what it's talking about. That's the theme of the book. Okay? The proud, God resists. But the righteous, they're going to live by their faith, their belief, their trust in God. So that's the answer to the theme of the book. The righteous, here referring to the godly Israel, those who live by their faith, those who trust God, they're going to see God at work. And I include Habakkuk. So that's the answer to God's question. He's going to use the Chaldeans, and they are also going to be punished for their evil. And those that were righteous in Israel, you need not worry, because you can trust God. He preserves you in the midst of things. And that's the theme that Paul picks up and makes the theme of Christianity. We have a trust in God, so we don't fret and we don't worry. Don't have to. Our God can take care of it, whatever it is. That's the hope Habakkuk really gives to all mankind. We can trust our God. Verse 5, furthermore, wine betrays the haughty man, so he does not stay at home. He enlarges his appetite like Sheol. He is like death, never satisfied. He gathers himself all nations, collects to himself all peoples. So here's a contrast between the righteous and the unrighteous. Pride leads people astray the same way alcohol does. It confuses you. You can't think straight. You do things that you don't even remember you did, and you wouldn't have done them if you'd been thinking. Okay? The haughty are never satisfied. And then there's 5 woes against the Chaldeans in 5 stanzas, and 3 verses of each is what follows. Verses 6 through 8 talks about those who looted, they will be looted, and they were. Daniel 5 describes what's going to happen to Babylon. So this is before they do it. They're going to do this. It's going to happen to them. Since we're looking back in history, it did. Verses 9 through 11, they were covetous, and they even took their building materials from other places. They'd haul away the bricks to build something else. But shame would be brought upon them because of their wicked plundering. It's interesting that God's hand wrote on the wall in Daniel 5 that they were weighed in the balance and found wanting. And that occurred at a great public feast celebrating the supposed safety from the evading Medes that were outside the gates. And they were. They were outside the gates, and they're having a party. We'll get to that in Daniel. So, again, this is what they were, this was going to happen, this is how it's going to happen, and it did. 12 through 14, they were ruthless people. The glory of Babylon was built upon the blood of those they captured and would be brought to nothing. So here's the glory of Babylon was destroyed. God's kingdom, his glory, would usurp it. The next woe, verses 15 through 17, there was debauchery, and they led others into immorality. They enticed other nations to join them. That's one reason they could grow so quickly. Join with us, and you can enjoy the spoils with us. And then they would turn on the comrades to take the spoil from them. Lebanon was an example of whom they utterly spoiled, even destroying the forest and the beast in them. The Medes, who destroyed Babylon, had been partners with the Chaldeans against Assyria at one time. So what they had done ended up happening to them. They make an alliance, they defeat the common enemy, and then they turn on the alliance, the partner in the alliance. So same thing happened to them. Medes and Babylons were both against Assyria. Eventually the Medes took over Babylon. So the last woe is against the gods of the Chaldeans that proved to be false or idolatry, because they were dead things. Quite a contrast to the living God. What profit is the idol when the maker has carved it? An image, a teacher of falsehood? Its maker trusts in his own handiwork when he fashions a speechless idol. Woe to him who says to the piece of wood, awake! To the dumb stone, arise! And that is your teacher? Really? But, you know, there's several other prophecies had the same kind of thing. You take a piece of wood, you cut it in half. This part you make an idol. The other part you make a fire and you cook your meal on it and go, aha, I've seen the fire, I'm warm. And you're bowing down to the other piece of wood. But that's idolatry. As he says, you've overlaid these things with gold and silver, but there's no breath at all inside it. For the Lord in his holy temple, let all the earth be silent before him. So it ends with a prayer of assurance and faith. It's a Shigionoth. It's a highly emotional, poetical form. So this is probably musical because it has selahs interspersed within it. Thrust of his prayer there in verse 2. Remember mercy. Lord, I have heard the report about thee, and I fear. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. In wrath, remember mercy. Then figurative speech is used about the Lord's display of his power in past events, the glory of God in the glory of God in verses 3 and 4. God comes from Teman, which is an Edomite city, so that would be the southeast area. Holy One from Mount Paran, which is in the Sinai Peninsula. Splendor covers the heavens, the earth is full of his praise, his radiance is like the sunlight, his rays flashing from his hands, there is the hiding of his power. Power of God then in verses 5 through 15, described in many different ways. Raging rivers, verse 8, the wrath of the sea, verse 8. 9, the bow is made bare, means it's shot. He uses other armies for chastening, the rods of chastisement were sworn, Selah. So it's poetical, it's musical. That is cleaved the earth with rivers, into verse 9. The mountain saw thee and quaked, the downpour of water swept by, the deep uttered forth its voice, it lifted high its hand. The sun and moon stood still in their places. That's a reference back to Joshua. They went away at the light of arrows, the radiance of thy gleaming spear. In indignation thou didst march through the earth, in anger thou didst trample the nations. And they didst go forth to salvation of thy people, for the salvation of thine anointed. Thou didst strike the head of the house of the evil, to lay him open from the thigh to the neck. Selah. Thou didst pierce with his own spears the head of his throngs. They stormed and scattered us. With 15, they did tread on the sea with their horses, the surge of many waters. So a lot of different events alluded here: the plagues of Egypt, the crossing the Red Sea, the Jordan River, the sight of God at Mount Sinai, the miraculous victories under Joshua. Victories won because God would send violent storms against them, against the enemy. And that often happened. God sent thunder and lightning and confused the enemy. And it didn't have to be with an army. God could do it other ways. So C then is his trust in God. 16, I heard and my inward parts trembled. At the sound my lips quivered. Decay enters my bones, and in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to rise who will invade us. So he recognizes this is what's been decreed of what's going to happen. And it's not pretty. We wouldn't like that ourselves. This is a lot of distress. We know it's going to happen, it's going to be bad. And yet in the midst of this, there's this trust that he has, and he's going to wait quietly for it. It's going to come because he has faith in God, which he expresses at the end of the last 3 verses. Though the fig tree should not blossom, there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, there is no cattle in the stalls. So that's famine. Yet I will exalt in the Lord, I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, he has made my feet like hinds' feet, and makes me walk on high places. And then it's for the choir director on the stringed instrument. So it's something that was supposed to be sung. So to do that is like we need to be encouraging folks in the midst of what we know is coming. And we should do that. Feet like hinds' feet, the mountain goats, the ibex. You've ever seen some of these videos of these mountains? Like, how do they not fall? You know, and they're running up and down like
a couple days after they're born, they're able to do it.
And they're doing that. So that's kind of the idea here. Is this is how God He enables us to do what seemed impossible. So let's take a couple-minute break. I need to get something to drink. All right, Zephaniah, contemporary with Habakkuk. His name means Jehovah hides. Same time period, 630, 622 BC. Again, this is before Josiah's revival. Theme, Day of the Lord, God's supernatural intervention into the affairs of men. Here's the outline of it, and we'll go through that in a little more detail now. Okay. All right, first starts off verses 1 and 2. Well, the theme, well, I'll talk a little bit about him first. Those known about this prophet, there's 3 other individuals who have the same name. He traces his genealogy in verses 1 back 4 generations to King Hezekiah, so he's the only one we know that had royal blood. And that may have given him a little more ability to approach the king and get a hearing. He was probably born near the end of Manasseh's reign. He uses the phrase, this place, referring to Jerusalem. He's familiar with it, so probably from Jerusalem. We date this before the revival because destruction of Nineveh is still future. That's in 612. And the idolatry is still in practice, so it's prior to all the reforms that came with the book of the law being found in 622. So, theme, Day of the Lord, God's supernatural intervention in the affairs of men. It's a warning to Judah that the final days were near, though divine judgment at the hands of through the divine judgment at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. But it also looks far in the distance as well to a future day of the Lord. And he actually used that phrase more than any other author. Day of the Lord, day of the Lord, day of the Lord. Several of them, Joel uses that phrase a lot, but this he used actually a bit more. It's a day of disaster. The background, as I already mentioned, the Babylonians are starting to rise in power. They're gaining power, but they're still not what you don't think they're going to be conquering Assyria. Assyria is still huge. Manasseh and Ammon had led the nation to horrible spiritual idolatry, harlotry. And until Josiah comes in and finds the law, that's just the way it is. So it's a judgment of Judah as well. This is going to happen. Here's the evils that are going on. So, again, verse 1, he traces his own lineage back to Hezekiah. And he says specifically he is prophesying during the days of Josiah. Verse 2 and through 3 is a judgment on the whole earth. It's a universal, complete removal, cutting man off on the face of the earth. Actually, kind of illusion here. It's going to be like the Genesis flood. It's going to.
So this is far. So you started with far.
It's everything. I'll cut off man from the face of the earth. He was talking about a future. So that's how he begins this. There's judgment coming. The cause of judgment in verses 4 through chapter 2, verse 3. There's idolatry, and apostasy, and moral and ethical corruption. Verses 4 through 6 is the idolatry. Mentions the Baals, the idolatrous priests. On the housetops, verse 5, the host of heaven. So they have something in the home. That's why I said related somehow to Zoroastrianism, astrology. So they have things set up on their roofs so they could see the stars and see celestial movements, and how does this relate to what their divinations. They bow down and swear to the Lord, yet also swear by Milcom, which is a detestable god. Josiah is going to take that out. So it's syncretic. With the Baals, they wanted to do that worship and worship the god. You can't worship both. And that's what they're trying to do, with syncretism. Milcom was an Ammonite deity. Also Molech, worship of, which had child sacrifice. All that was part of what's going on. Verse 7, be silent before the Lord. This is their moral deficiencies. There's really no defense considering what is going on. They should be leading the people away from this instead of into it. God's judgment is viewed on Israel is viewed as a sacrifice. The guests were the dreaded Babylonians, who as priests were invited to slay the sacrifice. It's kind of the idea here. The lament in this, on that day, declares the Lord, will be the sound of the cry from the fish gate, which is on the north wall, and now called the Damascus gate, to the second quarter, which is part of the area in Jerusalem where people live, would be over on the west side. It describes destruction. 13, their wealth will become plunder, their houses desolate. Yes, they will build houses but not inhabit, plant vineyards and not drink their wine. That's how quickly it will come. The merchant's been made wealthy from dishonest gain, and they're singled out for this anguish for it. The day of the Lord is imminent, verse 14. It's near, it's coming very quickly. Listen, the day of the Lord, in it the warrior cries out bitterly. A day of wrath is that day, a day of trouble, of distress, destruction, desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of trumpet and battle against the fortified cities and the high corner towers, bring distress on men so they will walk like the blind. Because they have sinned against the Lord, their blood will be poured out like dust, their flesh like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to deliver them on the day of the Lord's wrath, and all the earth will be devoured in the fire of his jealousy. For he will make a complete end, indeed a terrifying one. So it's a vivid description here. They're worthless. Their lives are treated that way. They're just thrown out in the streets as refuse. Even this phrase, neither their silver nor their gold. Okay, they had to pay tribute and they kept the Assyrians at bay several times. It's not going to work with the Babylonians. So they're called to repent, verses 1 through 3 of chapter 2. And then they start talking about the judgment of the surrounding nations. Seek the Lord, verse 3, seek the Lord, all you humble of the earth, who have carried out his ordinances, seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. So the humble he may protect. But then he goes into his punishment. God used the heathen nations to punish his people, but he's going to then have those nations also be punished. And he starts naming them. Gaza, so that's the Philistines, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, that's all the coastal plain, the Philistine areas. Well, you nation of Kerethites, the Lord's against you, land of the Philistines, the sea coast. Next is going to be Moab, verses 8 through 11. The Lord will be terrified. 11. The Lord will be terrifying to them. He will starve all the gods of the earth, and the coastlands of the nations will bow down to him. Every known place. So Moab and Ammon over to the east, southeast. Then Ethiopia, very short there, verse 12, you'll be slain, so that's south. And then Assyria, 13 through 15, that's the north. So really it's like Jerusalem in all directions. God is going to carry out his punishment. And remember when Assyria came in, they wiped them all out. When Babylon comes in, they take all those nations out too. Wipe them all out, including Assyria. 13, he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria. He'll make Nineveh desolation, parched like a wilderness. Flocks will lie down in her midst, All beasts will range in herds. Pelican, the hedgehog, will lodge in the tops of her pillars. Birds will sing in the window. It's like in the abandoned city. It's going to be destroyed. And again, Assyria, when this is going on, is at the peak of power still. Okay, Jerusalem, now they also are going to be judged. Chapter 3. So Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Ethiopia, Assyria, and then will woe upon Jerusalem because of her sin. Why? Rebellious and defiled, verse 1, tyrannical. 2, she heeded no voice, accepted no instruction, did not trust in the Lord, did not draw near to God. Princes with her are roaring lions, her judges are wolves at evening, they leave nothing for the morning. The leaders, the ones who should be protecting, are the ones who are consuming. 4, her prophets are reckless, treacherous men, her priests have profaned the sanctuary, they have done violence to the law. The Lord is righteous within her, he will do no injustice. Every morning he brings justice to light. He does not fail, but the unjust knows no shame. 6, I will cut off nations, the corner of their towers and ruins. I have made their streets desolate. With no one passing by, the cities are laid waste, without a man or inhabitant. I said, surely you will revere me, accept instruction, so her dwelling will not be cut off. All that I have appointed concerning her, they were evil and corrupt in all her deeds. So this is a warning. You see the nations around you being judged by God, you should take heed, right? So will they? So there's a judgment on all nations. Then there's a message of hope. And that's what you continually find, that God will bring future blessings. There's judgment, but there's also a hope for the future. Verse 9, for the nations, that all of them may call on the name, but then I will give to the peoples purified lips, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord. Serve him shoulder to shoulder from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. My worshippers, my dispersed ones will bring my offerings. The idea of purified lips here means not clear or distinct. It means pure speech is at a purified heart. Speech that is consistent with righteousness. And they will return from distant places to worship God. Judah, verse 11, a future for it. There will be a point in time in the future you will feel no shame, because all your deeds by which you have rebelled against me, for within I will remove from your midst your proud, your exulting ones. You will never again be haughty on my holy mountain. But I will leave you among a humble and a lowly people. And they will take refuge in the name of the Lord. The remnant of Israel will do no wrong, tell no lies, nor will deceitful tongue be found in their mouths. They shall feed and lie down, no one will make them tremble. So she's going to purge the evil out of it, and what's going to be left is going to be a righteous remnant. Therefore they can shout for joy, verse 14, because there is this future restoration.
This would be all of Israel that's saved.
Yeah, so that's why there's a day of the Lord that's close and one that's distant. So this future restoration is distant. I'll probably bring some of this up on Sunday, talking about why we're millennial, because you keep looking at all these promises and like, they haven't been fulfilled yet, so it's still future. And they're still looking forward to it. Shout for joy, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O Israel. Rejoice and exult with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away his judgments against you. He has cleared away your enemies. The King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst. You will fear disaster no more. In that day it will be said to Jerusalem, do not be afraid. O Zion, do not let your hands fall limp. The Lord your God is in your midst, a victorious warrior. He will exult over you with joy. He will be quiet in his love. He will rejoice over you with shouts of joy. I will gather those who grieve from the appointed feast. They come from you, O Zion. The reproach of exile is a burden on them. Behold, I'm going to deal at that time with all your oppressors. I will save the lame, gather the outcasts. I will return their shame and to praise, renown in all the earth. At that time I'll bring you. Even at that time I will gather you. Indeed, I will give you renown and praise among all the peoples of the earth when I restore your fortunes before your eyes. So it is talking about a future Messiah. So it's messianic when you get to that. And yet, as we've seen, that's a common theme in the prophets. Judgment because you're sinning. There may be a reprieve if you repent. You're going to get scattered, but eventually I'm bringing you back. There is going to be a future. All right, let's go back to Josiah. All right. So we left Josiah. They found the book of the law. And we have to take it that up until they found it, things were simply going the way he would have been raised and everybody else. You go 54 years, and only the oldest people will have even a faint memory of what it would have been like under Josiah. Everybody else now thinks this is what's normal. This is what's been done by the government. This is why, it's scary here as government keeps changing and promoting immorality. What is the generation coming up thinking? Well, we've already seen the result of that.
Yeah.
They just think, well, this is normal. Well, of course. And they have no concept that what is being promoted is wretched. And it works its way even among the quote-unquote righteous. They don't think much about it either. And they will go down a wretched path. It may not be as bad as what other people are doing. It's still bad before God. But they're just comparing themselves to other people, so well, not as bad as them, so I'm okay. That's, at the best, it could have been under Josiah. What do you know? They did not even have the law of God. They didn't even know what it was. They had lost it. So, in the midst of, I want the temple to be refurbished, they start collecting money for it, and they find the book of the law. It's hidden away. And with that, the first thing is they come and they read it to him, and he repents. He humbles himself before God because he recognizes we are in trouble. We've done none of this. So they inquire of a prophetess, Hildua. What's her name? Let's see. Chapter 22:11. It came about when the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his clothes. Go inquire of the Lord for me. Huldah's, Huldah, Huldah's prophecy. So they sent for her. She's a prophetess, the wife of a priest. And summarizing it, she tells him is, the things the prophets have already said are going to take place. Manasseh's reign was so bad, it's going to take place. However, you have humbled yourself. It is not going to take place during your lifetime. So there is going to be a reprieve. Verse 19, because your heart was tender, and you humbled yourself before the Lord when you heard what I spoke against this place, against its inhabitants, that they should become desolate and accursed. You've torn your clothes and wept before me. Truly I've heard you. Therefore, behold, I will gather you to your fathers. You shall be gathered to your grave in peace. Neither shall your eyes see all the evil I'll bring on this place. And they brought this back to him. So, that's a sobering prophecy in both ways. It's nice to know, while I'm alive, there's going to be a reprieve, but that's the nature of what's still coming. Well, when he hears this, he gathers all the elders of the people, he gathers the prophets, the priests, the people, small and great, so they can read the book of the covenant. And the king, verse 3, stood by the pillar, made a covenant before the Lord, to walk after the Lord, to keep his commandments, his testimonies, his statutes, with all his heart, all his soul, carry out the words of this covenant that are written in this book. And all the people entered the covenant. So he brought this about. We are going to do this. And so the reforms start, and I listed some of these out here. So he commands the Hilkiah the priests, and the priests the second order, and doorkeepers. Here's what they start doing. You start listening this out, and you realize how bad it was under Manasseh. Number one, bring out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels that were made for Baal and Asherah, and for all the hosts of heaven. And he burned them outside of Jerusalem, the fields of the Kidron, and carried the ashes to Bethel. Didn't even want that stuff near Jerusalem. He did away with the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had appointed to burn incense in the high place in the cities of Judah and in the surrounding area of Jerusalem, and also those who burned incense to Baal, and who burned incense to the sun god, or to the sun and the moon, and to the constellations and all the host of heaven. He brought out the Asherah from the house of the Lord outside Jerusalem, the brook Kindred, burned it at the brook, and ground it to dust, and threw its dust on the graves of the common people. He broke down the houses of the male cult prostitutes which were in the house of the Lord. That's where the women were weaving hangings for Asherah. Then he brought all the priests from the cities of Judah, defiled the high place where the priests had burned incense, from Geba to Beersheba. He broke down the high places, so that's the north area of his territory to the southern end of it. He broke down the high places, the gates, which are at the entrance of the gates of Joshua the governor of the city. Let's see. Nevertheless, the priests of the high places did not go to the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem, but they ate their unleavened bread among their brothers. So you can see the hearts of these guys still weren't with him. He defiled the Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, so that no man might make his son or daughter pass through the fire of Molech, child sacrifice. He did away with the horses which the kings of Judah had given to the sun at the entrance of the house of the Lord by the change of Nathan Melech the official, which was in the precincts, and burned the chariots of the sun with fire. The altars which were on the roof, the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the king of Judah had made, the altars which Manasseh had made in the true courts of the house of the Lord, the king broke down, he smashed them there, he threw their dust in the brook Kidron. The high places which were before Jerusalem, which were on the right of the Mount of Destruction, which Solomon the king of Israel had built for the Ashtoreth and the abomination of the Sidonians, and for the Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Milcom, I mentioned him earlier, the abomination of the sons of Ammon, the king defiled, he broke in pieces the sacred pillars, cut down the Asherim, filled their places with human bones. He wasn't done. Now all that's just around the temple and the king's palace and Jerusalem and the immediate surrounding area. That's a long list.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was. And so you can see, he finds out about this and it's immediate. That means this stuff was going on and he didn't think twice about it. He didn't know any better. They didn't even have the book of the law. He didn't stop there. Furthermore, the altar that was at Bethel, the high place where Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel sin, had made, even that altar and the high place he broke down, he demolished the stones, ground them to dust, burned the Asherah. Now when Josiah turned, he saw the graves that were in the mountain. He sent and took the bones from the graves, burned them on the altar, defiled it according to the word of the Lord, which the man of God proclaimed, who proclaimed those things. Then he said, "What is this monument I see?" And the men of the city said, "It is the grave of the man of God who came from Judah and proclaimed the things which you have done against the altar of Bethel." So here it is, 1 Kings 13:2 is fulfilled. Exactly the same way, by name. Remember, because that's exactly what it was. All that time earlier, hundreds of years later, a man, Josiah by name, is going to do this. And that's what he did. So he removed all that. Then his reforms continue on, and he reinstitutes Passover. Verse 22 states this is really surprising. Now remember, he's not a guy who grew up with this, okay? He wouldn't have wrote, what is it? 22, surely such a Passover has not been celebrated from the days of the judges who judged Israel, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. So this guy is wholeheartedly turned. More than that, he continued on. He removed the mediums, the spiritists, the teraphim, and the idols, the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and Jerusalem, which confirmed the words of the Hilkiah the priest. 25, here's his heart. Before him there was no king like him who turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. So probably one of the greatest kings. Now the difference here is he didn't know, he turned to it. Other kings were able to grow up in it. But this is an incredible guy. But the Lord was not going to turn from his wrath when it came to what's still going to come. I'll remove Judah from my sight, as I removed Israel. I will cast off Jerusalem, the city I have chosen, the temple which I said, my name shall be there. Then here it just gives a quick, or all the rest of his acts. And then it talks about Pharaoh Necho. And I want to point this out because this is where he dies. There was an alliance. Remember, Assyria had gone down and conquered Egypt. So Egypt now is in alliance with Assyria. Babylon has now risen, and it's a major power. In 612, Babylon beats Assyria and conquers Nineveh. We actually described it beforehand in the prophecies in Zephaniah. This is what's going to happen. All right? In 612, that happens. Now the army is still present, and so there's running battles as Babylon chases around the army of Assyria. They finally meet at Carchemish, and they are defeated. Now what was happening is Pharaoh was coming up, seeking to come and join in with the king of Assyria to beat Babylon. Josiah had been knew enough that Assyria is the oppressor here, and he seeks to intervene. So Pharaoh comes up the coastal route, he comes up the ridge route, and they meet at Megiddo. So this is a plain. This comes up. You remember being there, right? You went to Megiddo when you were there?
But you get Megiddo and Masada mixed up.
Okay, Megiddo is in the plains of Jezreel. It's a north area. It's a big plain. It's beautiful. And Masada is overlooking the desert. So it comes up. So there's a ridge of mountains that comes down like this. This is coastal plain. You come up through this ridge. So he comes in and he tries to intervene so that Pharaoh cannot join forces. He wants Babylon to win. So he's trying to negate this. But he loses. And Josiah is killed here in Megiddo. So now the king is dead, and Pharaoh then establishes, and then in very quick succession then, Pharaoh Necho establishes the next king. And he puts in Jehoahaz. He is evil, and he's only there for 3 months because Pharaoh is busy still because he's trying to battle, but as soon as he gets down, Josiah's dead, they establish his son. He comes down, he imprisons Jehoahaz and takes him to Egypt. And he makes his brother king, that's Jehoiakim. Now he reigns for 11 years. Now also intervening at this point, so Jehoiakim is under Pharaoh for several years. He's made king by Pharaoh Necho, and he taxes the land to pay Pharaoh tribute. So Babylon defeats Assyria, 609. Pharaoh goes back, so he still has his area of control. Babylon goes back to Babylon. It's consolidating all of its winnings. So for several years, Jehoiakim is under the thumb of Pharaoh. In 605, Nebuchadnezzar comes in, he conquers Judah, and Jehoiakim becomes his vassal for 3 years. Now, Nebuchadnezzar also go down, he will conquer Egypt as well. So he's his vassal for 3 years, and then he rebels, and he's oppressed during this period of time by bands of Chaldeans and Arameans and Moabites and Amorites. The Lord is just slowly whittling him down until there's really not much left. So first time Babylon conquers, 605. He He rebels after 3 years, and there's constant pressure. Remember, these kings, it takes a while to get things together, and you've got other concerns, but he's coming back. So 605. In 597, Nebuchadnezzar comes back, and he takes out Jehoiakim, and he establishes Jehoiachin, or Jehoiakim, not Kim, Kin. Okay, it gets confusing, I know, especially when you're reading through it and you find they also go by other names. So keeping track of the kings, especially in this area, gets a little difficult. He's also evil, and while Jerusalem's under siege, he goes out, he's captured, and he's deported to Babylon, along with the royal family, all the treasures of the temple, and the kings, the houses, and many exiles. All right, this is probably when Daniel goes to Babylon. This is when a whole lot of them go. So this is the second time Nebuchadnezzar has conquered Jerusalem. Okay? Now again, he's only there for 3 months. Now next comes Zedekiah. Actually, his name was Mattaniah, and Nebuchadnezzar changed it to Zedekiah. He is evil like Jehoiakim. He is actually Jehoiakim's, the previous king. He is his uncle, because he's the full brother to Jehoahaz, who was taken by Pharaoh Necho to Egypt. I can see you're following me very well, aren't you? All right. Josiah has several sons. All right. So son number 1 is established. He's only there for 3 months. He's taken to Egypt. Son number 2 is established. He goes for 11 years. He dies, and his son is established, but he's only there for 3 months. And Nebuchadnezzar takes him out and puts in his uncle, which is son number 3 of Josiah. Okay, so 3 of Josiah's sons end up on the throne at some point, and 1 grandson. So this is the 3rd son. He is the full brother to the first king. The 2nd son was a half-brother. So he and the first king have the same mother. Does that help? Now, 1, 2, 3 is easier to get than Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, Jehoahaz, right?
The names are like...
I know, it gets confusing. Okay. Zedekiah goes, and in his 9th year, he rebels against Babylon. They come up again, they lay siege for 1.5 years. It falls in 586. This is the 3rd time Babylon had to come up and capture Jerusalem. 3 times. Now, if you were the king of Babylon, what would you do at this point? Probably what Nebuchadnezzar does this time. He captures it, he takes the sons of Zedekiah, he kills them in front of him. Then he gouges out his eyes, puts in some fetters, and he is imprisoned in Babylon, takes him with him. He takes all the nobles, anybody's left, all that's left in the land that's not either deported or killed are just the poorest of the land. He takes and plunders everything worth plundering, and then destroys everything else. He burns down the temple, the king's house, all the houses of the wealthy people. Only the poorest of the poor are left. He's like, I'm tired of having to keep coming up here and conquering this place. I'm wiping it out. So that's what he did. Doesn't that match the prophecies, though, that had been said exactly what's going to happen? It's going to be wiped out. And that's what ends up happening. So the chief temple officers, king's advisor, captain of the army, they all, and 60 others are all executed. So that's the end of it. So he is the last king sitting on the throne of David in Jerusalem. Now after him, a fellow named Gedaliah is established as governor. So he's not a king, he's directly under Nebuchadnezzar's rule. And he actually seems to be a very good man. You'll find out a lot more about him in Jeremiah. An honorable man. He's trying to do what is right, but there is an element there that they don't want the Chaldeans there. They're still in rebellion. They murder him. The Jews are with him. The Chaldeans are with him at Mizpah. And now the people are afraid as we've just rebelled against this king again. He's going to come back up here, and they flee to Egypt. And when we get to Jeremiah, they force Jeremiah to go with them. He doesn't want to go. So that's Gedaliah. It's only 7 months. Kings ends with a final statement about Jehoiakim. Remember, we saw him before. Right? He had been taken to Babylon as prisoner. Eyes had been gouged out. And he is elevated by evil Merodach in the 37th year. 12 months, almost 38 years of exile. 38 years he's been in prison. And he now eats the king's table, and he has an allowance given to him. So the book ends with a hope that is talked about by the prophets. There is going to be a point when there's going to be restoration. That's the hope. That's what that's about. Okay? So that's a quick conclusion to the kings of Israel. Now, we're going to have to go backwards because we're going to have to take care of Isaiah. And remember, Isaiah starts during the reign of Uzziah. So he has his first vision and runs all the way through to Manasseh. He dies under Manasseh's rule, tradition says, by being sawn in half. So we got to go backwards and catch that up. For your reading, somebody said you weren't sure what was going on. What I want you to read through 1 Chronicles and then 2 Chronicles through chapter 25. That's just trying to, so it's a little, you're not overwhelmed with reading. And so we're going to have a quick overview of kings of Judah. That's all they deal with. It's just kings of Judah. Then the following week we're going to take 11 chapters of Chronicles and the first 35 chapters of Isaiah. So you've got more reading in the next couple of weeks.
How much of Chronicles for next week?
1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles 1 through 25.
So all of 1 Chronicles and then 2 Chronicles to
Through
225.
25. That's 54 chapters, so it's a lot of reading. More than you've had in a while. I think next time I do this, I'm going to merge Chronicles together with the Kings, so it's maybe have a little better flow. Usually when I teach this, it's just straight through as it's in biblical order, but then you're having to go back and forth, and I find the time element gets really confusing for people. It gets confusing this way too.
I'm glad you added that part.
So we'll take half of Isaiah and then the next half the week after. So by the time we're done with January, we'll have gotten through Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and then be done by the end of February. Now there is a possibility when Diane has surgery, I may end up canceling class that Thursday. So, but I'm going to have you reading anyway. All right?
Sounds good.
All right. Let's pray, and you got 2 minutes to ask questions. Thank you, Father, for your blessings to us, and as we're reading through these things, though in history it's hard when we see the kind of judgment that comes upon people, yet we know that vindicates your righteousness, your justice, and actually your mercy, since you delay for so long and give so many warnings. Yet we're also very grateful to see that all through this you keep giving hope. There is hope for the future, hope for return. Even the book ending with the fact that the one who had been king on the throne is being elevated in a foreign land. There will be a restoration. Thank you. The promises that existed then are and the promises that exist now are as sure as each other. Things you promise for our future, we know will happen. And like Habakkuk, even though there's things we don't like, we can wait in patience because we can trust you. In Jesus' name, amen.